Welcome to Meet the Candidates 2020, a voter education program brought to you by the Shakopee Chamber and Visitors Bureau. Our hope is that these candidate interviews and profiles will help you, the voter, understand your choices when it comes to casting your ballot in the 2020 elections. While we can all agree that an informed candidate is important, we believe informed voters make all the difference. So we ask you to arm yourself with the information necessary to make an educated choice and to make casting your vote a priority, regardless of how you do it this year, mail-in or in person. Please visit shakopee.org to find out all of the information you'll need to know about the upcoming election, including polling places and times, and a link to the Secretary of State website for mail-in voting options. Hi, and welcome to Meet the Candidates 2020, a voter education program brought to you by the Shakopee Chamber of Commerce. My name is Angie Whitcomb, and I'm joined here today by Minnesota Senator Eric Pratt for the District 55. I practiced that even. Senator, thank you so much. He is seeking re-election in the November election, and he's here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And we're off to a roaring start. Senator, why don't you give the folks at home a little bit of an introduction?
Sure. Well, I've been married to my wife, Tina, for 29 years. We have two kids, Cameron, who's 25, and Sammy, who's 23. I grew up in the area. I went to Prior Lake High School, but my mom was a teacher here in Shakopee for 25 years. I played football at University of Colorado, where I got a degree in economics. I later went on, got my master's in business administration and finance from the University of St. Thomas. I served on the Prior Lake School Board for 12 years, where I was chairman or treasurer for most of that time. When I joined the board, we had $1 million deficit, and when I left, we had a $3 million surplus, and really saw our test scores improve over that same time as we were experiencing tremendous growth. I currently I have served on several strategic planning committees in the community. I'm a director at St. Gertrude's, and I currently serve on the advisory committee for the Academies of Shakopee.
You're a busy guy. Senator, why don't you tell us, what have you done in the past to influence the way that government operates?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of how I approach my job really goes back to when I was on the school board. We would have our disagreements, but they were never personal. You know, we just worked them out, and we respected each other for having those differences of opinions. So when I joined the Senate, there was a group that was coming together called the Purple Caucus, and the idea was to work on issues to try to take some of the heat out of them, but also to build relationships across the aisle. And in fact, even today, when I'm looking for bill sponsors or running ideas past some folks, those are the people that I go to. I've also a founding member of what's now called the Civility Caucus, which is a group from both chambers trying to really change how we work with each other. But I have worked to build relationships across the aisle. Most of my bills are bipartisan with co-sponsors, and I believe most, if not all, of my bills have passed off the Senate floor with bipartisan votes.
Very good. I think that's what people want. Okay, so next question. If you could write, sign, and pass 3 laws today, what would they be and why?
I think the first one I would pass would be to make the changes in healthcare reform that we passed in 2017 permanent and fund it through the Healthcare Access Fund. When the ACA and MNsure came on board, we took all of our pre-existing and chronic patients and stuck them into the general risk pool, which caused everybody's premiums to go up. We had a program called MSHA that would subsidize the premiums for people with pre-existing and chronic conditions. So everybody was seeing their health care premiums skyrocketing 50, 60% a year. This was a 5-year program that we put in, and it's actually done better than we thought. Minnesota's now got some of the lowest health care premiums in the country. The program is actually costing us less than we thought. We funded it for the first 3 years. We think now that money we put aside will last the full 5 years. So I think making those changes permanent and keeping healthcare affordable. In fact, I was endorsed by a group called Minnesotans for Affordable Healthcare. So that's something that I think we should pass through. I would spur economic development, especially facing the recession that we're in. And so I would have maybe a suite of bills. One, to make the Angel tax credit permanent, expand our research and development tax credits, the ability, and then also to conform the ability to invest in your business, capital expenditures to conform with the federal tax law, because it's costing our business owners more in the state of Minnesota to invest in their businesses. And the Angel tax credits, we fund those on a annual basis, and so we don't have investors looking at our small businesses, our startups, on a regular basis because we don't have that flow of funds coming in. And we really do need to boost that small business entrepreneurial group to do better and create jobs in the state. And then finally, I'd fund roads and bridges using existing tax revenues that we've got from auto part sales and auto repairs. And that would put about $300 million into roads and bridges. And then I would hope to have some of that earmarked for the 169 expansion.
Here's hoping. So, Senator, how should the state of Minnesota balance the concerns between public health and the economy, and what role should the legislature have in that process?
This is something we've been talking about a lot at the Capitol. In the beginning, we didn't know much about the virus. And we were short on protective equipment. We knew we needed to take some time to increase the amount of protective equipment we had for our medical workers. And we also wanted to make sure we didn't overwhelm our hospital system. I mean, those were all big concerns. But, back in early April, I hosted a meeting with Federal Reserve President Neil Kashkari, the administration, and business owners, and we were talking, and I came to realize that the administration wasn't working with industry, wasn't working with business on what those best practices should be. An example was the landscapers had a whole protocol set out, and yet they weren't allowed to go to work. Almost as if the administration felt like they had to take all those rules on themselves. And so I began trying to encourage the administration to start working with business owners, start tapping into that expertise, because all of these small business owners have the incentive to keep their employees and their customers safe. No one wants to be the business that spread COVID on a job site. And so I've said we need to flatten the curve on the economic crisis with the same urgency that we flatten the curve on the healthcare crisis. And so I'm still pressing the administration to do more. In fact, I hosted a meeting with some local Scott County business owners where they proposed some of those same protocols like the landscapers did. And I was really disappointed because we didn't get a response from the administration for almost 6 weeks from that meeting. And in fact, it included masks. And so, I'm hoping that we can do better, because I think as we look at COVID going forward and the possibility, if not the probability, of seeing another spike, we've lost a good 4 months where we could have had small businesses getting on solid footing to make it through the next wave.
Yeah. It's so hard for me to walk away from this question. But so moving on to the next question. According to the State Budget Office, Minnesota is facing a projected budget shortfall of $2.4 billion for the biennium ending July 2021. How do you propose that this be addressed?
This is the biggest issue we're going to face next year, by far. The state is required to balance its budget. And so unlike the federal government, we can't pass a budget that's in deficit. We can use the rainy day fund that we have, which will cover most of the current deficit. But then, according to the the Department of Management and Budget, we're projecting another $4.7 billion deficit in the next budget cycle. As the fifth highest state in the country, we just can't afford to increase taxes. The last tax increase I saw from one publication said we probably lost $3 billion in taxable assets in the state over the first 2 years that new tax was implemented. So the main focus, and really kind of the way we dealt with it when I was on the school board, is to maintain and manage the growth of government. The budget assumes that some of the automatic increases that are, and that $4.7 billion deficit assumes that those spending increases that are built into the budget will happen. And so if we can pull some of those back, it'll take care of most of it before we have to make real cuts. But there are going to be real cuts that have to be made.
Thank you. So, Senator, we have seen unrest in Minnesota like we've not seen in my lifetime. What do you see as the causes of the civil unrest in our state, and what are the best solutions?
You know, we've really had, as Minnesota, as a state, we've really had a difficult history with racial equality. You know, there were neighborhoods in Minneapolis that had covenants that wouldn't allow you to sell your property to anyone other than a Caucasian, and really segregated themselves. And I think we can look back at that, 70, 80, 90 years later and say that that was wrong. And that's had a lasting effect on how we view each other. But more recently, we still see embarrassingly large gaps in student achievement in the K-12 system. And, coming from the school board and having a mom as a teacher, to me, education is really the cornerstone of addressing the economic gaps that we've been facing for a century. And I've always felt like we needed to close that education gap and not trap kids in failing school districts. Now, as chair of the Jobs Committee, I work with programs that help give people second chances. And so if programs that will help dropouts get their GED and high school diplomas so that they can move on. Second chances for people who were incarcerated, who are overcoming addiction. And quite honestly, those who are dealing with mental health issues or other disabilities, those are people we need to get into the workforce. And so, and then part of the economic suite that I forgot was to create some opportunity zones. Let's invest in communities with high unemployment rates, where we can get jobs to these to people who aren't in the labor force today, and help break that cycle of generational poverty. Now, I'm just going to be honest with you. What happened to George Floyd should have never happened.
Agreed.
And I think the police reform that we worked on over the summer is a good start. For me, it was important to have law enforcement at the table when we were talking about those reforms, and they weren't at the beginning. And I've even talked to our local law enforcement who are embarrassed by what happened to George Floyd. So, and quite honestly, what they've mentioned is that they're embarrassed particularly by the culture of the Minneapolis Police Department, as we've had many of these incidents over time. And I've been extremely proud that they've said that they would not tolerate that culture here locally. And so I hope that we don't see the same disparities that we're seeing in Minneapolis. Yeah.
Thank you. So with the last bit of our time here, Senator, I'd like you to take a look right at the camera and tell the voters, no pressure, and tell the voters why you would like their vote in November or sooner.
Sure. Well, thank you. And let me just say it's really an honor to serve this area, the area I grew up as your senator. Having grown up here, I've seen a lot of changes over the last 5 decades come around. But one of the things that I want to impress upon voters is that, so often I hear they're looking for leadership. And I think I've shown the leadership that so many are looking for by working across the aisle, by having bipartisan bills, by passing legislation off the floor with votes from both parties. On really and that I've been able to take on tough issues like passing Real ID so that we could continue to fly with our driver's license, teacher licensure reform, consumer protections. I took on insulin affordability and accessibility. And, as part of this crisis, we were able to pass some bipartisan legislation to help small businesses with guaranteed loan programs and grant programs. And so in the next session, we're going to be facing the impacts of the COVID crisis. And quite honestly, I think now is the time for proven leadership. And that's what I expect to bring back for the people of Scott County. Thank
you for your time today and for joining us. And thanks for watching this episode of Meet the Candidates 2020. Thank you for watching Meet the Candidates 2020, a voter education program brought to you by the Shakopee Chamber and Visitors Bureau. Please visit our website at shakopee.org for all of the information you'll need to know leading up to the November 3rd election.